Cost of living and inflation, that's what everybody wants to know. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about taking the plunge.
Here's your story, let's begin. The water's fine, come on, dive in. The future's here, it's right before your eyes. Step by step, you're on your way. Welcome to a brighter day. Don't you know it feels good to be alive?
So a lot of people have this romantic notion around taking the plunge. And by taking the plunge, I mean moving to another country. We have these ideas of going and laying in the hammock and listening to the ocean wash up on the shore, or see the breeze wafting through the palm trees. And who doesn't want to live a life like that? But I'm here to tell you that no matter where you are in this world, life is going to have its issues. And living down here is no different. It's not to say that you can't live a life that's truly spectacular, because I feel that I do. I love being down here. I don't want to leave. I have no intentions of leaving. On the other hand, I have to be honest and recognize that my personality is, let's say, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit quirky. Not being surrounded by others is not a big issue for me, but for most people, that's an issue. So let's talk about some things that can come up that I don't really often talk about because they don't really apply to me very much. First of all, people that come down here very often are operating on some fantasy. They've already conjured up their image of how they're going to live. And that's the first mistake, because the truth is you don't know unless you've already lived down here and you're returning. Whatever your fantasy is, it's going to be wrong. And trying to build towards a fantasy without knowing what the situation is a big mistake, because you're just out to let yourself down. You're chasing something that in 6 months you may find is not your fantasy. It's totally invalid, and you go in a different direction. One of the big things that people have, I want to go down, live in Colombia or live in Ecuador. I want to get back to nature. Okay, but you can get back to nature anywhere you are in the world. I see it as a warning sign. Let's say you get that little place out in the country and you're comparing it to, okay, I've been working in the city and I've been living in the suburbs. Now I want to get out in the country. I'm retired. I've got money to spend. So I can go out in the country and I can have my own little plot of land and I can have a dog running around. But that comes with issues that you're not aware of because you don't know what it's like here. In Ecuador, that's actually quite dangerous. You can become a target. In Colombia, not so much. However, in Colombia, what that means is you've got to take on a lot of responsibilities. You've got to go through the process of getting your driver's license and getting a car, doing the registration. And you think that it's bad doing it in California or in Nebraska or New York. It's far more complicated, and it's relatively to the income expensive here. You also don't have the same laws. You don't have the same liability laws. You could be getting yourself into a situation where you're accepting the cost or liability of something that you really can't afford. And so you need to think about that. Rental cars the same way. You're assuming certain liabilities that you just can't insure your way out of. Just understand that plan that you have to come down and live off the land and get back to nature, the reality is going to be something different. So if that's what you're coming down for, understand you're going to have big obstacles that you didn't expect. Another one is, this is the one that really kills me. I want to come down and I want to live like the natives, or I want to live like the locals. And I don't know what that means. If somebody goes to the United States, I mention the United States a lot because that's where the majority of the viewers come from. They come from all over the world. Got a lot of people in England, and they're just all over the place. But 60-some% are from the United States. and there's a lot from Canada, but I'm from the US. I focus on the US primarily because that's where most of you are from. This issue of living like the locals, or more offensively, living like the natives. Okay, let's say in the United States, you want to live like the locals. How do the locals live? What locals are you talking about? Are you talking about middle-class people in Miami, Florida? Are you talking about wealthy people in Wyoming? Are you talking about poor people in upstate New York? Do you have a concept of what the reality is? See, I know what you're thinking. I want to go down and I want to immerse myself in the culture, and I want to learn the language, and I just want to be one of them. I want to fade away and disappear into that culture because I just want to absorb it all and I want to experience all that. And I get it, but it's not practical. It's not realistic. You're not from this culture. Your expectation you're setting for yourself is simply not realistic. Now, if you've lived here for 10 or 15 years, you slowly accumulate that kind of identity. That's one thing. But to come down and say, like people say to me, I want to live like the locals, I mean, that instantly tells me you don't know what the hell you're talking about, because what locals do you mean? I've had people say, well, I don't want to live in a high rise. I want to live like the locals. Well, in my last high rise, 360, there's a couple hundred condos in it. I was the only gringo. So who are all these other people? Well, guess what? They're locals. Who do you think live in it? There's hardly any of us in Armenia, Colombia. And so who's living in all of these high rises? Who's driving all of these new cars all over the place? Those are locals. You know, it's like if you what you really mean is I want to go live in poverty. I want to struggle. I want to live in a crappy apartment. I want to eat rice every day, all day long. That's fine. You can do that. But I doubt that's what you mean. You know, you've got this fantasy that drives this. You know, it's in the United States, you see it with American Indians. I have a pretty close association with some tribes in the United States, American Indians. And I can tell you that this idea that they kind of got it all figured out and, you know, they're in touch with the spirit world and all, it's all crock. It is not what you picture it to be. They don't have all the answers, and everything they do is not the right way to do things. It's a dream. It's a dream world that, you know, is fed by Hollywood. It's not the reality. If your motivation to come here is about, you know, getting back to nature and, you know, living like the natives, reevaluate those. What you really want to do if you want to come live here is build a new life. And you're going to have to be flexible and you're going to have to adapt. Another mistake that people make is they come here and they want to reconstruct the life that they had. They just want to live cheaper. Okay, well, you can live cheaper, but you will never reconstruct the exact life that you had. Now, I don't care if you live on the East Coast and move to the West Coast of the United States. The life that you were in one place will not be exactly the same as the other. And here, where you've got a much greater cultural difference, it will be something impossible to achieve. So these are things that will just lead you down the path of disappointment, where if you come, you're open, you're more flexible, then you will be pleased with how things progress. Stop locking in your expectations. Other things that you need to consider is, are you financially stable? I don't mean to get a visa, but I mean to come up with whatever you need to come up with for emergencies, for example. Because when you come down to South America, be it Ecuador, be it Colombia, you're losing your safety net. Now, in the US, you got safety nets all over the place. You lose your job, you get unemployment insurance. If you can't afford to eat, you can get food stamps. If you can't afford to get an apartment, you can get Section 8 housing. It doesn't mean that's what you should do, but I'm saying you don't have to be out in the street starving in the United States because you always have some place to turn, even if it's to the Salvation Army. Down here, you're a foreigner. And when you got your visa, you already testified by virtue of the application that you don't need to be supported by Colombia. Think of it. Colombia doesn't really want people to come here and have to live off of other people. You've already verified that you have the means to take care of yourself. You want to take that seriously. You are here to take care of yourself. There is no safety net. If you run out of money 2 weeks before you're going to get more money, you're not going to eat. That's just how it is. Think about that. Another thing is your social circle. It will take you some time. Now, the nice thing about Armenia is that it's so easy to make friends here. It's almost impossible not to make friends because they're going to push it on you. However, building up a social circle is something different. I have a social circle. I'm very comfortable with it. It's easy for me. I've traveled through most of my life. I've lived in a number of countries for 3 years or more. I lived in Japan for over 3 years. You know, you learn how to do these things by doing them. But if you're lacking in a lot of that experience, you're going to come down, you're going to, think that you're just going to have all these people around you. And the only way to do that is start buying friendship. Well, that's a huge mistake. Don't ever do that. You're sowing the seeds for disaster down the road. You don't buy friendships. But building that social circle takes some time. And so, can you weather the storm? Can you go without that social circle around you for whatever period of time it takes to build that up? And keep in mind the language differences. Which brings me to the language. My Spanish is crappy. When I first moved to South America, it was practically non-existent in the first couple years. Because of circumstances, I wasn't getting any practice in. It was just, I barely understand a word here or there. And I got along fine. But I'm used to doing that kind of thing. There's ways to do it. Even if it's a pantomime, I can do that without feeling self-conscious. But language can be a barrier for people. Now, in a place, again, like Armenia, Colombia, less so because people are so friendly, so helpful here. But there's other places I've been in Colombia where people just get real ignored. And if they hear you and they think that you're a gringo and you're going to speak English, they'll ignore you. They'll turn your back on you. They just don't want to deal with it. You find that all over South America. And here in Colombia is no different. But there are places in Colombia where it's not like that. I happen to be in a place where it's not like that. So that's something to consider. Another thing is how important it is to stay busy. If you're coming down here alone and you don't have that circle of friends for a while, it's really easy to kind of build up your little nest, and it's really comfortable and you got all the amenities and they can deliver to your house, and you find yourself just going out less and less and less, and you become landlocked. You become in your apartment or your house and you just don't leave. That is not healthy, and that's a path to an early death. You need to find ways to stay busy. There's lots of ways you can combine certain things. You can do volunteer work, your language. There's schools are dying to have people come and volunteer to have communication with their students. So you can go for an hour a day, 3 times a week, or whatever it is you set up, and sit down and just have conversations with the student. That'll help you with your language. It'll help you build your social circle, and it will keep you busy, and you're doing a nice thing. But there's a lot of other things. I've covered them in the past in videos that you can do. But the point is, make sure you're doing them. And then you also have family. I don't have much family to speak of, mostly because they've died. But I do have some. In my weird way, I feel great loss not seeing a couple of them. And it torments me sometimes. For the most part, most of my life has been separated, living in other countries and in the Marine Corps over 6 years, and just various times in my life, I've learned to deal with the separation. And that's all well and good. But again, most normal, sane people who have family need to see them once in a while. Can you afford to make trips back every once in a while to fill that need? Or can you afford to bring them to you? Now, that's a great way to do it because you can expose them, you can bring them here, you can have a great time taking them out and showing them around, and they're going to have experiences they've never had before. That's a wonderful thing. But the question is, can they afford to do that, or can you afford to provide that? Something to consider. I'll give you a few tips. When you're coming down here, make sure you set enough money aside, make your move. You don't come down here with $1,000 or $2,000 extra and your pension and think that you're going to set yourself up. You want to come down between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on the lifestyle that you want, how you're going to live, and what you're willing to do. Are you willing to get a used appliance versus do you have to have a brand new top of the line appliance? I don't recommend that, at least initially. So, but your budget has to be somewhere in that $5,000 to $10,000 mark, or it's going to be a huge mistake. Now, the best part is you can set yourself up for a few $1,000s, and that'll leave you with a few $1,000s extra that you can put back. And I highly recommend that. Go back, no safety net. So be prepared to have your own safety net. Make sure that you're setting aside your fantasy and focus on the practical things. Use a budget. It's really important that you live by budget. What happens is people come down here and they're living on a certain economy and they see money in a certain way, and it's been ingrained in them over the years. They come here and their first thought is everything is so cheap. It's because you're seeing it through the eyes of another economy. After you've lived here for a while and you're seeing and living the economy as it is, you figure out that it's a very different situation. And a big mistake that a lot of people make is they come down initially and it's so cheap. It's like there's no importance to money. And their first thing is, I want to leave a big tip. I'm going to give the taxi driver, the equivalent of $2 or $3 tip when he's got a $2 fare. I can afford to get such and such. And you'll find after some months that was a huge mistake and that you pissed away a lot of money that you will wish you had in the future. Don't make that mistake. Set yourself a budget and live within that budget. It is critical when you're making an adjustment from one economy to another. Yes, things are much cheaper here, but everything isn't much cheaper. There are differences. You need to be prepared for that. And since you don't know what those things are, don't waste your money now. Okay, fortunately, we don't have this in Armenia, Colombia, but in a lot of big cities or medium cities throughout South America, pollution is a problem. One of the things that people, Medellin, it's heaven on earth. It's like, yeah, it's nice. It's a nice city if you like 2-3 million people around you. But yeah, but it's in a basin. It's surrounded by mountains. And the traffic is insane there. Traffic, a big problem. Gives you a certain amount of pollution. And being surrounded by those mountains, it keeps that pollution down on you. And I go there for 2-3 days and my eyes are burning and watery. And, during COVID recently, everything lightened up and there was a lot less pollution going on, a lot more days where it was clear. And you've got people making decisions now on those trips when they're going to come down and get themselves settled in there. And then in a year or two, when that all returns with a vengeance, they're going to go, oh my God, what have I done? See, because you don't have a broader perspective. But pollution can be a real issue. And if you're thinking about going to Medellin or Bogota or someplace equivalent, Cali, it's a problem. So keep that in mind. And, it's like, think Mexico City, only not, there's probably no place on earth as bad as Mexico City. Paperwork and bureaucracy. It's easy to get frustrated. Now, the good news is, particularly if you're doing retirement, but even with other visas, that to get your visa accomplished here is so much easier than a number of other places. It's one of the easier places you could deal with. Ecuador, kind of a nightmare here. However, you still have a certain amount of paperwork and you still have a certain amount of bureaucracy. You also want to be careful of who you're dealing with. I've mentioned this before. It's a big mistake, in my opinion, to hook up with an immigration lawyer here in Colombia, because the truth is they're overpriced and they're not very good at it because they're not doing it that often, contrary to what you would think it would be. And you deal with these visa agents who are doing it multiple times a day, every day of the year. They're really on top of it. Just recently, somebody sent me something his lawyer told him he was going to need for his visa, and I'm looking down through it, and a number of it was just conjured up. It was not even true. But it's one of the things that they'll do. They make it sound like it's so involved that justifies how much they're going to charge you. For example, he's coming from the United States, and they're telling him how he's got to get this document certified and apostilled. Well, yes, but a visa agent will actually go to the embassy in Bogota for you, the U.S. Embassy, and get it apostilled for you. That's part of their fee. But the lawyer is going to chase you to do a whole bunch of things that you have to take care of. So it's less he has to take care of, yet he's going to charge you more money for the process. So you want to be careful of that. But that aside, dealing with the bureaucracy in any Latin American, Spanish-based country can be a nightmare. So be prepared. It can be extremely frustrating. There's no logic behind it. And if you get upset, it will just make matters worse. Take a deep breath, bite your tongue, and just roll with it the best you can. It doesn't mean get rolled over. You can ask questions and you can push back somewhat, but getting angry will destroy you. It will end you right there, so you don't want to go that path. So be prepared to have a certain level of patience. You have people that have this idea they're going to come here and get a job. Well, that's kind of foolish because, you got a certain level of unemployment. So does that mean you're going to come down here on a visa said that you could take care of yourself? And the way you're going to do that is try to take a job from somebody in Colombia. So not only ethically, that's kind of but it's practically a number of visas you're not even legally permitted to work. So you have to think about that. Now, if you have a job waiting for you, like 20 years ago when I came down, I had a job. I was hired by the Colombian government to do some work at the university in Pereira. And I wasn't taking a job from somebody. The reason they reached out to me is I had a skill that they didn't have here that was able to go do that. So they hired me, brought me down. I'm down here for a period of time. They're paying me my income and money to stay. Whole different ball game. But moving down here and taking, routine jobs from people that could be doing it, and the education level in Colombia is equal or better than most places in the U.S. now. 20 years ago, the skill I had just didn't really exist here. If you have to come down here and earn money, so if you're not retirement, but you're younger, in order to do it, you've got to supplement your income. You need to come with you with whatever that is, be it some kind of internet thing. You need to do that. Also consider that whatever you have could go away. For example, when I first came to South America, I was earning about $4,000 a month on online consulting work. But over the course of a few years, that dwindled and dwindled and dwindled until it was gone. Now, number of factors in that. If you have companies that are paying you for information, at some point they don't need you anymore. So there was that. There was the internet issue when I moved in Ecuador to a small town, and I was having a lot of connection problems. So there was that. Plus, you're out of that sphere of your clientele. You're not making social meetings, and you're not going to various conventions and things where you're networking and perpetuating more clients for yourself. You're down here kind of living a separate life. And so in my circumstance, that $4,000 dwindled down to $0. I was prepared for that part of it. I wasn't prepared for an emergency that came up, that on top of something where I had no income for a few months. That was a nightmare. So when I tell you about having a safety net and having some money back, I'm telling you from experience. Coming down with your own job is the way you have to do that. And if you can't do that, then rethink coming down. Okay, now here's more of a social tip. The first thing that people do when they come down is they're comparing the life that they knew to what they have here. And they will usually verbalize it. And in many ways, it'll be in a manner of, geez, when we would go to the grocery store, we could kind of zip through and zip in and out. And the way we did it was just so much better. Here, I have to wait in line and da-da-da-da-da. And it can become a habit where you're constantly comparing and you're thinking about how wonderful certain things were where you came from and how more difficult, or you think of it as backwards or inefficient, or, throw in your description. And that's a sure way to drive people away from you. Imagine what that's like, to be around somebody who's constantly talking about how backward and inferior you are. What you don't understand is that, well, some of that may be true. Some of it is true. But in many cases, there are reasons for it that you simply don't understand. And it's your ignorance that causes you to say some of these things and make comparisons that don't really apply. And in many cases, you will find that there are better ways of having things done here. So if you have any notion of that, keep it to yourself. You will have that. You will have those thoughts. Oh my God, this is so crazy. Why don't they do it like this, this, and this? I get that. But it's obnoxious as hell. It won't do you any good to be like that. And what I suggest is you try to put more thought into it, try to understand better why they do what they do. And you'll be surprised. Now, the last thing I want to address is some feelings that you will have to address of one type or another. And be prepared. First of all, guilt. Guilt of leaving loved ones, family, friends. Did I make a mistake? Is it, maybe some remorse in there? You got one foot in, one foot out. And that's kind of a sure sign. Think of it as a relationship. If you're not fully committed to that relationship, at some point it will fall apart. And then you could say, see, I knew, good thing I had my backup. Well, it was the way you were handling that caused it. So, think about that. But guilt is a big one. I see that in a number of people. I feel guilty that I retired from my job and I left these obligations on other people's shoulders and all of that. You got to get some perspective on that. Homesick. You know, a lot of people get homesick. And me, no. But it can be debilitating. So you have to know we're all different. So, but understand that that can be an issue, and you want to give that some thought. And if you start feeling homesick, how are you going to handle that? Think about that. The isolation that you will have. Now, not always, unless you choose to have it, but for a number of months, there'll be certain amounts of isolation that you have. Guys that are coming down here, they have this idea that they're instantly going to have this girlfriend, and she's going to, you know, you got to have more patience. It takes time. So be prepared for a certain amount of isolation. And tied to that is loneliness. How do you handle being lonely? I get lonely sometimes. I can call people, but I get lonely for other times, other places. I get nostalgia, but loneliness. I think sometimes about my life in Japan, the people that I knew there, and I miss them. And I feel lonely because I'm no longer in that circumstance. I feel that in upstate New York. I feel that sometimes about when I lived in North Carolina. I feel that even about, you know, living in Ecuador. I feel lonely that I don't have, you know, Sandy and her sister and, you know, all of those people around me. I can have people here, but at the same time, I can feel lonely for those situations. How do you handle that? Now, I handle it pretty fine. But it can be debilitating for some people, and it can lead to depression. And the last thing I'll mention is regret. If you set yourself up wrong, I can guarantee you that you're going to feel regret, and you're going to feel it was a mistake. It might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 3 years, but at some point there'll be regret. And when you hit a spell where things aren't going well, which you will, because you do everywhere in life. Nothing is ever always perfect. You have ups and downs. You know, having a close friend commit suicide is something I wasn't prepared for. These things, bad things, you know, can and will happen in your life, no matter where you are and where you live. So how are you going to handle that regret? Are you going to disrupt your life again at the first sign of bad times and think, well, if I were back where I came from, I wouldn't have to be dealing with that? Well, but are you putting on the rose-colored glasses because there was a reason you came away from that situation? So what was that? Which will lead me to the very last thing I'll talk about is moving here solely for finances can be a big mistake unless you really dial in everything I've talked about in this video. It's not enough. It can be. You can make the best out of it. If you simply can't afford to live where you're coming from, and you're even here, you're not living great, but at least, you know, you have food through the month and you can pay your rent like that. Okay, I understand. Some people have those situations, but understand that that's also bringing you a bunch of issues. You are not going to come here on, you know, $900 and live like a king. It's just not going to work that way. You know, you want to have somewhere around $1,500 and up in order to have a good middle class life. And despite the idea of I want to live like the locals and whatever, you need to live a life similar to what you came from, or you're going to have some issues around that too. Okay, that's all I got for today. So before you take the plunge, take this stuff to heart and give it some real thought. This isn't for everyone, but if it is for you, life doesn't get much better.